Hello and welcome to my channel. This is going to be another Mandalorian inspired drawing, this time focusing on the Mandalorian's gunship, the Razor Crest. And as you can see, that's a pretty complex object, and I also want to talk about how you can tackle drawing such complex objects even though they may seem pretty daunting at first and you can feel like you don't know where to begin. Lately I've been doing a lot of these drawings where I'm not even sure what they're gonna look like because I only work out some elements of the composition. Here I wasn't really sure what to do with the background. I just knew I wanted to put the gunship more or less in the center, and I wanted the Mandalorian there as well, walking towards the ship. So first I was wondering whether I should put him on the left side or the right side, and eventually this is what I decided on. But like I said, at this point I still didn't know what I was going to do with the background, but I was probably going to do a simplified desert-like background with a cloudy overcast sky or something like that. Anyway, a few words about the sketch. There's no shame in tracing. It's a legitimate way of constructing a sketch. Of course, when you're drawing things like vehicles and equipment, doing some measurements and using rulers and compasses is of course better and provides for more precision, but it's also a lot less fun, and I highly recommend doing a little bit of work using tracing when drawing things like such as this spaceship, because it'll simplify the process quite a bit if you don't care too much about precision and straight lines and things like that. But even when I lay down some of those basic distances and basic relationships by using tracing, I still have to put in a lot of detail later when I start adding some more texture and detail and other stuff to my drawing. Now as for the drawing process so far, I started a little bit on the Mandalorian, then I started a little bit on the engine and the gunship, and then I did a little bit of the background. So as you can see, I am working my way from left to right and from top to bottom, being right-handed, but at the same time I think there was a little bit of procrastination on my part because I wasn't really sure how to tackle the gunship, and I had to remind myself something that I'm going to tell you as well, which is that when you're dealing with something as complex as that gunship, it's good to put in the larger details, the larger shadows, to take care of some of the larger relationships, and then out of that mess you can start to create some details and refine shapes as you move towards the smaller relationships. But the bigger relationships between areas of lighter and darker value are the ones that will help you start drawing even the most complex of objects. As you can see, I did a little bit of work on the Mandalorian. The light is coming from above, so the upper part of his helmet and cape has some highlights on it, and that's why I did a little bit of shading on the background with my vine charcoal to get some contrast so that these highlights would stand out a little bit. They don't really stand out too much, so I'm going to clean them up a little bit later and maybe clean up their edges as well. I'm going to want some sharper and cleaner edges there around the helmet and the shoulders, and I'm going to make some less defined, blurrier edges lower down where his feet are. And I'm going to do the same thing with the ship. Now, as you can see, I'm starting to work on the ship, and I started to draw some of the details, but I'm basically going over some of my sketch and making my sketch a little more complex, this time sketching with my charcoal pencil, which isn't really too recommended because it's not as easy to fix your mistakes. But the thing is that I'm mostly doing something that's somewhere in between sketching and blocking in, because I'm trying to put in these larger areas of darker and lighter value so that the shape of the ship becomes more clear and more apparent to me. And then once all of that is in place, once the tone and value is in place, then I can start to go in and work on the details. And it's a good time for me to mention my tools right now, because I am using a combination of different types of pencils and tools. As you can see, for the background I used vine charcoal a lot because it's very soft, and I've already talked about that. Vine charcoal is easily manipulated, easily lifted off, easily blended. But I also used vine charcoal on the hull of the ship as well, in combination with the compressed charcoal and my charcoal pencils. For drawing these darker areas I used charcoal pencils, and for blending all of that I used tortillions and brushes. I roll these tortillions myself. If you want to see how, you can check out my video on my channel. It's not complicated, it only takes a little bit of practice. I find that these homemade tortillions work even better than the ones you can buy. And I talked about this as well, you have to understand the properties of each blending tool, because each blending tool does different things or blends differently. So brushes, they tend to blend pretty smoothly and push the charcoal into the grain of the paper, but at the same time they allow you, if you use less pressure, they allow you to preserve some of the texture. Tortillions and blending stumps, they pretty much destroy that texture and blend more thoroughly, also adding more value to everything. While paper towels and tissues, they blend softly and they blend smoothly, and they're especially good for lighter areas. What I'm doing now is going in with a black colored pencil and an eraser and working on some details. So once I've done that blocking in, and once I've established the areas of lighter and darker value, these larger areas, I started working on these details and adding some of these, I don't know, parts on the ship. And I also have to keep in mind that I have to, because the aircraft is made of metal, I have to make sure that it looks shiny and reflective. So the contrast between, high contrast between lighter and darker areas is very important here. And now I'm working on these blasters and trying to add a little more detail here on top. The reason why I'm doing this with a black colored pencil rather than a charcoal pencil is because a black colored pencil can be sharpened to a finer tip that holds better and just allows for more precision, and it doesn't smudge, it sticks. But the thing that you need to remember is that you can't really use charcoal that well on top of a colored pencil because it's waxy and it won't work. But when you use a black colored pencil on top of charcoal, it works really well. So that's why I put down the charcoal first to do most of my shading, and then I started to work on the details with the black colored pencil. In case you're wondering about the brand of the black colored pencil, it's a Primo black colored pencil, nothing special. I mean, the brand is really not that important. And another thing, you can see how carelessly I covered much of the hull with my charcoal sticks and pencils. That's because I didn't really bother to blend it in too much, because I was kind of hoping that the charcoal in combination with the tooth of my paper would provide some texture, because the ship, it actually has a lot of texture, it has a lot of weathering, maybe even some signs of damage and use. So I want to retain that look. If you've been doing any modeling, like making plastic model kits, or assembling plastic model kits rather, or watching videos of people doing this, you can see that when they make a tank or an airplane or something like that, they never leave it looking brand new when they assemble it and paint it. They usually go through a process of weathering, where they make the vehicle or the aircraft look like it's been used, like it's like some of its metal has sustained some damage. And that's kind of the look that I'm going for here. You can see that there is some chipped paint here on the side of the hull, and maybe some scratches, maybe some oil streaks and things like that. So I don't really need to define everything. I don't need to try to over-explain everything with my pencil. I can just make certain suggestions, and the eye will, and the viewer will probably come up with their own ideas. The imagination will do the rest. But the thing is, like I said, that I do want some rough texture to create a weathered look of the gunship. And because these large engines are round objects, or they have to be shaded so that the side which is facing the light source is the most reflective and the lightest. And I'm also doing a little bit of work with black colored pencil, adding some details on them once I've done the shading with the charcoal. I don't really need to see all of the details in my reference photo. I can improvise a little bit. I hope that I won't be too criticized too severely by a Star Wars fan who knows exactly what Razor Crest looks like. All I have to do is make it realistic enough and close enough to the original, I guess. And I never cared too much about precision, to be honest. Now I'm doing a little bit more work on the Mandalorian's legs, but I can't really put too much detail here because it's in the shadow and we're looking at it from behind, so I'm kind of trying to not exactly blur it out, but make it darker and just create some suggestions of shapes of the stuff that he's wearing on his legs. And like I said, I'm going to make the portion around the legs a little bit less defined, and I did the same thing with the landing gear of the ship. Just created a light suggestion of the shadow as though they are in the sand or something, dust. And now I'm trying to cover much of this background and foreground and to create some variation in the terrain using my brush. I don't really want any real detail in the terrain because I already have plenty of detail on the Mandalorian and the gunship. They are the focus of my drawing. I want the background to be as simplistic as possible, as simplified as possible rather. I just want a little bit of variation in the terrain, and I'm going to use my vine charcoal here to create some hills or mountains in the distance very lightly. And you can see by the way that I'm using my brush is that I'm kind of pulling downwards. I'm trying to keep the upper edge of every of those hills and mountains cleaner, and then I'm pulling downwards to make the lower edge less defined. I'm also going to create an overcast dark sky with a lot of heavy clouds. So I just put down some vine charcoal and blended it with a soft brush. And then I try to smooth it out a little bit, and I'm adding a little bit more in the top part and the lower part of the drawing, because I feel like I need a little more darker tones and darker value there for the sake of balance, I guess. So now I'm using a larger brush to blend that in even more, and just adding a little bit more vine charcoal where needed, because I feel like there were some white spaces around the edges that needed to be filled in. I already did one drawing of Mandalorian with Baby Yoda, and there will be a link in the end screen if you want to check that out as well. That one had less of a background, but I feel that it was a lot more complex. So, and you can see more of the Mandalorian's gear on that one. So if you want to check that out, you should click on the link in the end screen. The drawing is finished here. I just cleaned up the edge above the right engine a little bit, and here's my signature. That'll be all for this drawing. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.